So I get a lot of questions here on the channel. People want to know about any number of things, but at the top of that list of things that people want to know about, the answer that they are searching for is, when is the best time to visit Walt Disney World? It's probably the question that I get asked the most, and it comes up every year like clockwork around this time, which makes sense. People are planning their vacations for the coming year, and they want to do everything that they can to ensure that they're doing the best they can to have the best vacation possible, right? And we want to help you do that. But the tough thing about this question is that it's not as straightforward as I think some people think that it is. You know, like, what exactly do you mean by the best time to visit Walt Disney World? That could mean anything. The most affordable time, the best weather, when the crowds are the lowest. Now, of course, there are people out there who are looking for a combination of all of that. They're looking for those magical dates where everything is just, it falls into place and the crowds are low, the weather is perfect, and the price is just right. But unfortunately, and I really hate to break this to you, I do. It brings me absolutely no joy. That's a unicorn. It doesn't really exist. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people aim to find those perfect dates, but at the end of the day, you have to sacrifice something in order to get the other thing. You have to pick and choose. You know, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to put up with so that you can get that other thing that's higher on your priority list? Now, the tricky thing is that around this time of year, because people are planning their vacations, because people are looking for that information, there's a lot of information floating around, especially on social media. People are tossing out dates like their life depends on it. And I understand why they're doing that. I understand that it's answering a question that people are asking, so they're doing their best. But I also think that it's important to proceed with caution, especially if you're trying to plan your vacation and you're relying on the dates that some people you find to be reliable are sharing. Anyway, I want to share some of my thoughts about this with you today, explain a little bit why I think you need to take all of these suggestions with a heaping serving of salt, and I'm going to give you some of my guidance. I don't necessarily know that I would call these tips or tricks, although you could probably classify it as that, on how to try and figure out what dates are going to be best for you and your family. So first things first, why do I think that we need to proceed with caution and, you know, be careful when we see all of these like little pieces of information tossed out at us, these very specific dates? Well, here's the thing. It isn't that simple. Especially in the past, let's call it 3 to 5 years. So for those of you who are wondering like where my thought process is on this or where I'm getting that thought process, it's important to recognize that for the past 5 years, since 2020, there has been a lot of uncertainty. And I mean, you could say that for any number of different things, but specifically when it comes to this travel space, more specifically when it comes to the way that people travel and what their travel habits look like centered around Walt Disney World and theme park vacations. Of course, I'm focusing in on Walt Disney World for today's discussion, but I'm sure that this applies elsewhere. Most people remember the travel restrictions that were initially in place and how that was lifted and how things kind of evolved in the first few years of this search for a new normal, let's call it. I mean, I don't know what else to describe it as, so I hope that we can agree on that kind of term. And as the years progressed, things adjusted. Some travel restrictions lightened up. Some habits changed because of the way that people were traveling with their families. For example, there were more people doing distance learning or remote work, and that really did play a role in how people chose to live their life, how they chose to take vacations, and just how they did this thing that looked very different only a few years prior. And even though we're currently like what feels like days away from 2026, and everything that happened in 2020, 2021, 2022 feels like a million years away, it's important to recognize that there are still repercussions from all of the changes, all of the adjustments that have happened since then. Travel habits have changed. The way that people do their vacations and when has become a little bit more unpredictable, and things continue to shift as we continue our way ultimately toward 2030. And you can see this if you pay close enough attention. And I recognize that not everyone does. I mean, most people have better things to do, which is why you rely so heavily on people like myself and others who are talking about this pretty regularly because we have boots on the ground, we've got eyes on it, we're paying attention. And one of the things that we've been noticing, and it's not just me, other people have noticed and talked about this as well, is that the travel habits, the predictability of 2019 and earlier, maybe even early 2020, that is gone. None of those things, almost none of them, I should say, apply in the same way today as they once did. And in some cases, it's big things. Like, for example, in the past few years, we've been noticing a lot less people are actually traveling on the vacation day, or on the holiday, I should say, you know? So I think a few years back, Easter was one that popped up a lot, and then Memorial Day was another, Veterans Day was another, where in the past you would go, wow, the crowds are out of control on this holiday, but people have started to shift, traveling the week before or the week after, and that has put a wrench in the this is the best time to travel discussions that people like to have this time of year, which again makes sense when we're on this road to trying to find a new normal or find center again. You know, not only are we talking about new families entering the let's do a family vacation space, but we're also talking about new circumstances and the way they travel changing because of all of these factors that either apply or don't apply or apply again. You know, like, there's a lot to it. It's not just the same information that it used to be in past years applied to this year, but tweaked a bit. And so that's really important to be aware of, you know, that things are continuing to change. We're still looking for that sweet spot where people's habits repeat year after year. But the tricky thing about giving these types of predictions when it comes to crowds and stuff too is that it takes a long time for predictable and reliable habits to form. Like, we're talking about years and years. And the truth of the matter is there just hasn't been enough time for a really reliable habit to be formed in most cases. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can aim for. There are some things that are more likely to be reliable than others. For example, we know that it's more likely than not you're going to see less families traveling here in the United States, at least at the start of the school year, which starts in September. So it's not uncommon to see attendance drop here at Walt Disney World, albeit still not a ghost town like some people say it might be. To that same point, there are times when people prefer to travel on the weekends or during holidays, which usually coincides with school breaks. Spring break is another one of those times where it tends to be a little bit more crowded. But of course, these dates, these times are flexible. Now, that's not to say that these aren't dates that you should shoot for. You can if they work for you and your family, but it's important to understand that a guide is very different from a rule. And, you know, while you can hedge your bets on it being less crowded during the September timeframe when school is in session, you shouldn't think that it's a guarantee that it'll be a ghost town or that crowds will even be noticeably lighter, because of course this is also the time that Disney takes advantage of. Maybe they take some attractions down or whatever the case may be, you know, get some work done while the crowds are lighter, and it can make things feel crowded regardless. So what do? You know, there are two main things. The first is, I always think that you should travel when it's best for you and your family. And then you can work around everything else later. There are 1,000 ways to avoid crowds and cut down on wait times, even if it doesn't mean spending more money. We talk about that all the time here on the channel. But the other thing that you can do, this is actually a great way to figure out what the crowds might look like based on really good data. It's data coming straight from Disney, is to pull up the Walt Disney World annual pass holder blockout dates calendar. I'll have a link to this in the description box down below. And I want you to focus on the Pixie Dust Pass. This is a Florida residence pass. It's the lowest level pass. It has the most blackout dates. This calendar is going to give you an idea. Again, this is a guide. You know, use it as a tool, not a rule, of when the Walt Disney World Resort is going to be most crowded, when they're expecting to have the heaviest crowds. Because during those times, annual pass holders who have the Pixie Dust Pass are going to be blacked out. Now, I've been using this method for years, and I do find it to be a pretty reliable indication of what the crowd levels are going to look like. You know, like, generally speaking, again, is it sometimes a little bit off? Yeah, but more often than not, I find it to be a pretty good guide for trying to find the most crowded times of the year versus the times when it's not as crowded. You can also check to see what the park pass availability for annual pass holders looks like. Now, I say this not being sure if there's a way for you to see that if you don't already have a Walt Disney World annual pass. So just bear with me there. But even if you don't have access to that calendar, keep your ear to the ground and hear what other Disney news sources might be saying. You know, sometimes when there's something big that's coming up, someone will say something like, oh, there's no more park pass availability for annual pass holders on this date. That's probably an indication that it's going to be really crowded that day. Again, tool, not a rule. So take that information and use it wisely. Now, there are, of course, some other things that you can do that aren't going to necessarily apply to every vacation. Honestly, none of this is going to apply perfectly to every vacation, you know? So you have to take the pieces of information that you hear and make it work best for you. But if you are traveling during the Halloween or Christmas season, you can also use party days to your advantage, specifically at Magic Kingdom, if what you're looking for are lower crowds and lower wait times. We have tested this many times over the years. This is one of our favorite ways to experience Magic Kingdom. But again, like I mentioned earlier, there are trade-offs. Most people don't like visiting Magic Kingdom on a party day, especially if they don't plan on attending the party, because you don't have a full, 14 hours of Magic Kingdom for your park ticket. The park usually closes early at around 6 o'clock. But because most people don't like to visit on that day, you get less people using their Magic Kingdom park ticket on a party day, and that means less crowds. So it's a trade-off. It's something that you have to decide on and decide if that's worth it for you and your family. But it's one of the things that is an available option for you. As a side note, this only works for Magic Kingdom. Like I said, it does not work over at Hollywood Studios during Jollywood Nights. So just take that into consideration. That all having been said, what have we learned here? Well, not all that glitters is gold. At the end of the day, you really have to define what the best time of year means to you and understand that the information that's out there might not necessarily be as accurate as you want it to be. So take it with a grain of salt so that you're not taken by surprise when it doesn't work out the way you hoped it would, and really think about the things that you prioritize and what you don't mind sacrificing, because ultimately you're going to have to sacrifice something. So make sure that it's not the thing that would really make your vacation worth taking. At least, in my opinion, that's the best way to go. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, so feel free to pop your thoughts in a comment down below. But for now, I'm off. Thanks so much for hanging out, and happy vacation planning. See you guys in the next one. Bye.